Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of BizzTalk Africa. I'm your host, Jason Schuster from BizzTech. I'm here with my wonderful co-host, Vidya Mike. How are you doing, Vidi?
I'm wonderful, wonderful. So happy to be here this week.
Me too. Me too. This is a very exciting show. I'm really happy to introduce Shereen Daniels. Welcome, Shereen. How are you today?
I'm very well. Very nice to be with you both. So thank you for having me.
Oh, it's our pleasure, 100% for
Absolutely.
sure. So, and Shereen is with HR Rewired. She's the managing director, and we are talking about an awesome, cool topic. I'm glad that we have you as our guest today to talk about it, and that is racial equity in the workplace. So, Shereen, before we get started, can you just give the audience a couple minutes? Tell us your story. Tell us about just kind of a little bit about your background, what brought you to where you are now, and then we'll dive into the topics after.
All right, lovely. So my background is human resources. I've been in HR for about 20 years, and I spent my time being the proverbial person that didn't want to talk about race. I tried very desperately not to be that person. And after the murder of George Floyd, it was that realization that I thought, where has my silence got me? Where has my silence got people who look like me? Because we spent so hard trying to assimilate and integrate into environments that were never really set up for us to succeed. So I started recording videos, and one video became 10, became 100. Lots of videos talking about this subject. Ended up being featured in Forbes, being one of LinkedIn's top voices last year. HR Most Influential Thinker 2021. But what was happening at the same time is that organizations were reaching out and saying, we thought we understood this issue because we've been talking about diversity and inclusion for years. But in hearing you talk, we realized we don't, and we need some help. So
Wow.
that's how HR Rewired came to be. And we basically just help brands take meaningful action. So, from right to contexting what systemic racism means, which is different to overt behavior, how it manifests itself in the workplace, and what does it mean to become anti-racist? What does it mean to practice racial equity? And what are some of those very challenging conversations that need to be had? So I'm a professional talker, basically.
Professional talker. I love it. And gosh, it's amazing. You really have accomplished a lot in a very short period of time. But obviously, you had the background first, right? You said 20 years in HR, but then just like you said, in like the last maybe 18 months, 2 years, your presence really has exploded. That's
100%. I mean, and just, some people forget. They see, if you look at me on LinkedIn now, some people are thinking, oh my God, she's got, all these followers. Listen, in June 2020, I had 3,500 followers. So when I tell you that I had no brand agency, no marketing, nothing like that, I was just somebody who was deeply upset, and I was annoyed. I was frustrated with myself. I was, frustrated with senior leaders that were like burying their head in the sand and hoping this would all go away.
right.
I was also annoyed at tokenistic gestures. Let's just put one black face on the cover of our marketing materials. Let's find some more, black and brown people to come and show that we're really doing something. But when you talk to people who are most affected by this, they were like, nothing has changed. Nothing's changed.
It's an interesting topic. And Jason, you're a minority right now, I have to say.
Yes. Today I am.
But what I just did there, and we all laughed about it, that's how it should be. We should all be able to be open about a topic because we are who we are. And racism is not just color. It is any sort of prejudice against an individual that actually makes them different from the norm. So, I just want to say, and I feel, Shereen, I feel strongly about this topic, not because of, my color, where I'm from, because, there's color segregation in everywhere. Where I'm from in the Caribbean, you probably not this color enough or that color enough or, whatever. It's just how people treat a little bit what's not the norm and what's different. And we need to be beyond that. So, I mean, like, I can see a little bit of seriousness there in what I said,
Yes.
because it kind of like hits deep, right? But this is the reality. It's the same sort of topic about having more females on a board.
Yes.
And it's, to me, it's the right person for the right job. And no matter who we are, we all have a duty of care to up our game. We need to be competitive. We need to make sure that we are the best person that we possibly could be. And then, Shereen, the stuff that you're doing is absolutely critical. It's what's needed. And so, like, what are your views from what I just said? Because, I suppose it could be a little bit controversial, but, it is a reality.
I think some of the misconceptions, if I think about this area, is I think there's a difference between representation, so how representative you are according to your community, the country you're in, etc. And there's a difference about the presence of racism. Racism is a system, and I think this is one of the things in terms of the work that I do of context in that. So racism as a system is about power dynamics. So you can be prejudiced against, I can be prejudiced against Jason. Jason can be prejudiced against me. Jason can hold stereotypes about me. I can hold stereotypes about Jason. But what you have to understand is under the guise of how society is structured, so we do live in a racialized society from a power perspective that puts power and privilege with those who are at the top. And that just so happens to be white men. And as you go down this ladder, almost, you have Black women at the very, very bottom. And so there's all these differences. It's like a spectrum alongside that. And the system called racism is, the way you know it works is because it keeps producing the same consistent favorable outcomes for some and the same consistent unfavorable outcomes for others. So prejudice on its own is not enough to talk about the system of racism, because I don't have power. I don't have institutional power. I don't have institutional power in a legal sense, in an employment sense, in an educational sense, in the media sense. So what you're talking about is understanding how, if you occupy a particular ethnicity and gender, in this instance, the fact that our society is constructed in all the different ways it all weaves together to ensure those favorable outcomes for some. So I would urge anybody that's listening to me talking and thinks that, I'm not racist, I don't discriminate, I see everybody as I find them. If people work hard, they'll get rewarded. It's like the meritocracy argument almost, best person for the job. All of those things are true, providing we live in an equal society. So actually, when you're talking in an organizational sense, the best person for the job isn't actually the best person for the job. It's the best person that you can find in the time frame, with the network that you're using, with the tools that you've got at your hands. So everything is context. And so I spend most of my time giving that context and telling people to go deeper, because to your point, Vidi, some of the marginalization for other groups, whether it's about women, whether it's about people of different sexual identities or orientations, comes from a root cause, which is kind of what you're talking about, which is this idea of what's normal and what's acceptable, but also what is superior, So until we start to get into some of those conversations and understanding how power manifests itself in the workplace, who has the ability to make unilateral decisions about people without them being in the room, who has the ability to improve their situation, even knowing data that says there are inequities and inequalities, but can they do that? Or do they have to wait for people who occupy a majority position to, in essence, open the door?
Interesting. You said something, Shereen, that it's a concept that I haven't really thought of before, about the best person for the job being limited to the best person that I maybe have access to hiring, right? So if my network isn't racially diverse, then I really can't say that I hired the very best person for the job on an equal basis, because maybe my network is mostly white men.
It's flawed at that stage, yeah.
It's
right.
fallen
And I
out
mean,
of place.
and that's true based on where I grew up, where I've networked. I live in Austin, Texas, which is a very white society. So that's most of my network. I went to college in Utah, which same thing, not a very racially diverse place. So you're right. My network maybe is unequal. And
Yes.
so if I'm the one going out and finding someone to hire within my network, then maybe it's not really equal. So maybe I need a partner, maybe like someone like yourself, to really broaden that horizon. Is that kind of what I'm hearing?
Absolutely. And I think this is where, and this is why so much of to do this work meaningfully and to make sure that you don't perpetuate harm is almost to challenge some of those assumptions that we've had, just in the same way that we've just had that little conversation about, best person for the job, etc. And go, actually, like, is that really the case? And so many people right now are thinking that the way to solve the issue that has arisen because of the murder of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, because of everything that we're seeing, even recently, is about, well, if we get more Black people and, people of different, whatever, fill in the blanks, that magically means that everything is okay. And from a cultural perspective, it's leaky bucket syndrome, because you're going to bring all of these people that have got great ideas, collaborative, different ways of thinking, which ultimately is what diversity is about. But if your culture is not geared up to support them, to make them feel like they've got a voice, to help them navigate that without only some people winning and being promoted and going to the top, they're going to leave. Which is what we've started to see in the last 18 months, organizations and individuals have made these grand statements of how they stand in solidarity against racism and they're going to do their best to do differently. But like I said, if you go back to the people that are there and they're like, well, nothing's really changed, not really, because our focus is not in the right places. So the network piece is a massive, massive part of that. Who do you know? Where are you going?
In that, to just sort of dig a little bit deeper into what you just said, and before I do, Jason, you're the best partner that I could possibly have to present it, right? I mean, let's face it. I mean, it's magic, right? So
I do.
wouldn't want anybody
I
else.
love doing these with you, Vidya. I absolutely love it. So,
So like, I didn't even know you were white until you just said it.
Oh my gosh.
So Shereen, in terms of you said that people say that nothing's really changed. Are these people in the organization? They are actually being so like, what are the expectations, and what are, I mean, what have you seen that businesses are not, organizations are not doing, that they really should be doing more of? And I think this is really important for our audience, because everybody needs to take stock, right? Because you sort of, the thing with, you said is systematic. Systematic means that some of these things are programmed into you.
Correct.
Once it's programmed into you, you just believe this is the norm, and you're not aware of you're doing certain things. So probably, we sort of need to make sure that actually happens. What are some of the things that you've seen repeatedly happening?
So I think, first off, to your point about the systemic nature of racism, the reason why it's still here, 500 plus years later, dependent on your point of time, is because it relies on our lack of focus. It relies on our compliance, our silence, our apathy. It fundamentally relies on us not challenging the way things are, not challenging outcomes, not challenging data patterns, all those things that tell us there are inequities and inequalities in the world. I think the thing about what colleagues in the workplace, no matter who they are expecting to see, is fundamentally about trust, and it's about safety, right? So you have to remember that organizations typically are not good at acknowledging the lived experiences of people who are minoritized, as opposed to minority, because I don't use that phrase. And so for many individuals, they have felt silenced. They felt like their voice has not been heard. So even though organizations can say, like, oh, we've done this, and, we've got this speaker in, and we've had people, come in and talk about racism, like being really challenging. A lot of that has been about easing white comfort and making white people feel comfortable about the topic, which is very different to putting in things in place and focusing on impact, which is, can we actually say that we have made a difference for the people that are most impacted by racism? Not because we can tick a list and say we've done all these things, but in essence, what we're saying is we're giving you the power, you know, Shereen, people who look like you, to evaluate our performance in this area and say, have we made a difference? Have we started to look at how we promote people? Have we looked at what behavior change needs to come from our managers and leaders? Are we clear on what accountability looks like in this? Are we clear about how this aligns with our values and our culture? So all of this, and it does, I know it might sound very organizational design and culture, but that is the work that needs to be done. And I think for anybody who's thinking, like, who is doing this well, I never name brands. I never do that because there's always skeletons in closets. So, you know, we never go there with that one. But the ones who are doing the work is because you've got the CEOs who's saying, ultimately, I'm accountable and responsible, but so is my board. So what we're not going to do is have the HR and the recruitment people and the, you know, the employee resource groups or the one or two Black colleagues that we have shouldering all of the work, educating everybody. We're not going to support them. We're not going to give them budget. We're not going to give them resource. We are also not going to interrogate ourselves in this. We are going to go on this journey no matter how uncomfortable that is. And they also don't expect to be an expert in the Black experience, but instead what they start to ask is better questions. You know, why is it that my culture works so well for people who look like me, white male, cisgendered, you know, whatever it is? What can we learn from that? Because that is the insights that they can bring, rather than feel like they have to watch all the documentaries and all the podcasts and read all the books, right, to understand Black people, like we're an alien race or something, you know? And so that's where I see, I call them my gold star CEOs, because that's the sort of thinking that they have around this, rather than, let me just make sure I can look like I'm doing something that's good, even if it isn't really. Like, we're going to really do the work. And we recognize this is a long, multi-year strategy, not something that's going to be done by the next financial year.
Right.
It's very interesting. Sorry, Jason. And it comes back actually beyond a business, right? It comes back from society and how society has been set up. You know, I'm originally from Trinidad and Tobago, and our motto is every creed and race find an equal place. And you sort of grow up from, you know, like two beyond, always saying that. And you know, like we don't see these things because, you know, society has actually started to deal with it from an early stage. So I mean, Shereen, to your point, it's from how society is set up, it's from school, and unless we sort of address this even early on, the business is the end result. At the end of the day, a corporate trying to make money, and you know, it sort of gets so far that how do you deal with it? Going back to, you know, education, going back to how recruiters are actually doing that recruitment process and making sure that they get, you know, a variety of apples so that you could start this selection process. I think, you know, it's such a thought-provoking thing that you sort of mentioned. And what is the right answer? I mean, I know you're dealing with work that you're doing with corporates and companies and stuff like that, but actually, you know, we had to go a little bit earlier on as well, and that's a real battle. And it's so good that we have people like you who's sort of making this so obvious to the rest of the world, because it's very important.
I think it is, Video, and I think it's still like it. Look, we've all been conditioned, for want of a better word, right, by the society. So I always say everyone has a relationship with racism. Some people are more acutely aware of it, some people aren't. It's got nothing to do with skin color. It's about the fact that we all live under a society that is unequal, that is based, right, that's based on the power structures. So straight away, when you start having conversations from that perspective, not from I'm racist, no, you're racist, I'm not racist, it completely starts to change the landscape, and also it helps people decenter themselves from that conversation, because so often, you know, if you try and have a conversation, historically, it's still the case now, it's getting a little bit better, but if you try and have a conversation with anybody who isn't anyone who isn't black or brown and doesn't understand what it is to be marginalized and excluded, the conversation is very much driven by the comfort of the person that you're talking to. Invariably, in my experience, it was white leaders, white managers. And so they spent so much time trying to make sure that nobody perceived them to be racist, that it completely derailed the conversation. And you never got to, like, this is what life is like for me here in your organization. So to your point, Vidya, some of the work around this is introspection, it's individual work. I always say organizations are not sentient beings. They are made up of human beings. They are made up of us, right? So if you want to see change, you have to start with that change with yourself first, and understand that's going to be a ripple effect, and understand that it's going to be uncomfortable. I'm very public, you know, and everyone sees all the things that I talk about and see all the things that I do. What they don't see is the abusive messages I get. They don't see the fact that I have very senior professional people following me on different platforms and threatening me and calling me all sorts of names purely because I'm talking about this issue, you know. So I have to work very hard to not let my voice be silenced by people who feel like I have a disproportionate influence because I am so focused on this. So I recognize how difficult it is in an everyday context to have this conversation. But, you know, I go back to, if we don't, nothing changes, you know.
Right.
Indeed.
Well, and I think it's also interesting, you know, at the very beginning of our discussion, you talked about how for many, many years, you yourself felt like you needed to stay silent about these issues. And I would imagine there's still a lot of people of color that still feel that way, the way that you were feeling.
100%.
And so, and that makes a difference too, right? That's, you know, when there's a sense of unity, it's a lot easier to make systemic change. But if there's still some fracturing in, you know, people coming together on that, I'm sure that does, it slows things down, I'm sure.
Jason, 100%. I talk, I know in very business terms, but I'm always about efficiencies and inefficiencies, right? So, you know, if we go back over history, when civilizations, or what I call unhelpful societies, you know, and I know it's sometimes this is about a judgment thing, but basically things got changed, not because people in power decided they were going to change. It was because the little people like you and I, and some of the people listening, banded together and said enough is enough.
Right.
You know, so that was, you know, what you're talking about, Jason, is almost like the sea change that happened, you know, with the murder of George Floyd. Because let's be clear, there's lots of examples every single day all over the world of people being treated like George Floyd was treated because of their skin color. But that particular moment in time, captured on social media, I think was a wake-up call to a lot of people who felt like we were living in a post-racial society, meaning, you know, that you accept people for who they are and what they can bring to the table, etc. And it was that realization that at a fundamental level, like for some people, their human rights are being violated. Do you know what I mean? So being able, to your point, in terms of pushing past that discomfort, but recognizing there is unity and power in solidarity. You know, I have many, many followers from all over the world, from all different religions. They don't all look like me, but they do support what I'm trying to do. They do act as co-conspirators, for want of a better word, more than allies. They're like, listen, what have we got to do to change? And so every time we are silent, we miss an opportunity to connect with people who also feel the same way we do. You know, so part of me keep talking and keep the focus is, if I convince one more person to have the conversation, that's how we start, you know, because then you recognize you're not on your own.
That's it. Very interesting. So my background's in the gaming industry. That's where my primary experience.
Yay, what are you? I'm a gamer.
So as far I am a gamer, but my most of my career has been in the gaming industry. And so, and the gaming industry is really interesting because it actually is a very diverse industry. If you look at the people who are actually doing the creation, creating the content, it's very diverse in the sense of gender, race, and I mean, all of that. It is a very diverse industry. However, like you talked about power dynamics,
Yes.
the power dynamics in that industry are still very flawed. And I'm not going to name names like you said.
No,
but
we don't need to. I know exactly who you're talking about.
We don't need to talk about it. And while that movement and that, you know, that conflict is primarily over gender discrimination, I do believe that there's still the racial discrimination, the racial disparity is also there. It's just not being, you know, it's not being shouted from the rooftops, but that the actions that are being taken, that unity that's starting to form to try and change those power dynamics. You're saying maybe we could see more of that in other industries with other,
Listen,
you know,
Jason, 100%. It's already started happening. So, you
right.
know, you've have, and there's lots of examples. I don't need to name any brands because it's all out there for everyone to see. But if you think about some of the big global tech companies, you know, you've got examples of colleagues coming together and writing open letters. They're setting up websites. They're publishing books to talk about their experiences of racism, discrimination, anytime they're being othered. Because what they're saying is, as a company, you're not listening. So, and because of technology, because of how we've had to interact with people very differently because of the pandemic, it's a lot easier to connect with somebody who thinks the same way that you do. Conversely, it does have its challenges, and we can see some stuff playing out in the US by which, you know, very damaging groups are able to come together, right? So, you know, it does have its plus and its minuses, but I do genuinely believe that, like, if people care and if people fundamentally want to be on the right side of history, and if people recognize that in 20 years' time or 30 years' time, you know, when our children or our, you know, our family members, our next generation are coming up behind us and they're saying, you know, when all of this stuff was going on in 2020, you know, I think we'll refer to this time as our, like, this time of civil war. This will be our civil rights movement, sorry. And they'll be saying, you know, what were you doing? I genuinely believe for most people, they want to have an answer. I have 2 children, you know, and I have my 13-year-old is Black, my 3-year-old is biracial because my partner's Estonian. And my background is the Caribbean, Jamaica and Guyana. So I very much want to have an answer for them. You know, I want to be able to say, this is what your mum did. Like, she wasn't playing. Do you know what I mean? That's literally. So above everything else that I do, I just want to be able to look at my 2 children. And when they're seeing stuff on the television about how wrong the world is, I want to say, listen, I did my best to try and do good and put it right. I didn't sit back. I wasn't passive like I had been. And it's important for me to be a participant in change, not just somebody that sits on the couch and criticizes what everybody else is doing. That's like a values thing for me. Like, I have to do the work, you know?
Absolutely. I think you'll inspire so many more people as well, because as you said, right, you know, where you started in 2020 on LinkedIn to where you are now, it's becoming more and more a subject where people are ready to discuss it, or even if they're not ready, they have to sort of discuss it, and they can't be left behind. And companies know this as well. And I hope that educational institutions are actually listening and treating this with the same thing, because you know, the right person for the right job is not only attitude or what you look like, it is your technical competency. And you know, we need to make sure that, you know, the kids and everyone below have the fair opportunity to, you know, have the right education, have the right level of exposure.
Yes.
You know, and that is so critical. And once you have that exposure, you know, you're out there.
100%.
That's why I like gaming too, Jason. I'm always a guy.
Are you?
From Japan. Yeah, absolutely.
Did you know, like, my games of choice, just for anybody who's remotely interested in gaming. So the God of War series, I like Darksiders. I like, if anyone remembers PlayStation 2 back in the days, they had this brilliant game, Legacy of Kain, like Soul Reaver. I don't know if you know it yet. I'm so sorry. I'm showing my age. So that tells you my vibe. So I'm all about the RPG. I'm all about, you know, give me swords, give me flaming creatures jumping off, or give me all of that.
I love it. I love it. Man, for me, I my game of choice is Assassin's Creed for the same
Oh, you
reason.
like
Just-
that? It's
Yeah.
too
Oh.
intricate. I'm not coordinated enough. I'm falling off the sides of buildings. I'm like, I'm not coordinated enough for that.
No, I love it. I love the dive into history and different
Yes,
cultures.
it's
And
beautiful. It's actually beautiful. I've got such respect for people who work in the gaming
It's got
industry.
it's
It is.
educational. It
It
has
is.
story. It has
is.
everything you
It's
need.
like being in the movies in your house, and
Unless
yeah,
you get killed within the first 15 minutes,
Yeah.
then it just
Ah.
repeats itself, right? So,
yeah.
Jason,
At least
I'm
we have
gonna log on
autosave.
what you play.
Okay, all right. I'll have to start streaming, guys. Let's make it
I know.
happen. So, but okay, so I have to say something horrible, and that is we're out of time.
I knew you were going to do that.
Just
Every
as the conversation
time.
was warming up.
I know. So, but here's what I want to do. So we are here at BizzTalk Africa. We're about to go on a short break for the holidays. Short break. We're gonna resume next year. Shereen, I'd love to have you back again for another show. Would that be?
I'll
Would you
come
like that?
back. Yeah, I would
Yeah.
love to come back. You guys are a riot. I feel like there's so many things we could be talking about around this, couldn't we?
However, it's
Absolutely.
subject to one thing.
Oh, go.
While
for
we
it.
have that break, we have something called the One Tribe. And we coined that here on BizzTalk because it is exactly, and it's very pertinent to what you're talking about. We are all still one tribe. No matter who we are, where we're from, whatever, it's still one tribe, a human race. And if we sort of always keep that in mind and we work with each other, care for each other, and look after each other, we will succeed.
Absolutely.
So we always end the session with one tribe.
One
Okay,
tribe.
there
That's
we
right. Shereen, thank you so much for coming. I really, really appreciate it. I loved this. I loved meeting you and this discussion. It was wonderful.
You are so welcome, and thank you for giving me the space. You know, so much people are like, I don't know what to do. You know, sometimes giving people that are doing the work the platform to be able to share their messages is also you supporting. So I'm appreciative of you both and Dirk for inviting me and just giving me the floor. You know, so thank you.
Well,
It was our pleasure.
You know what? I think like somebody followers that we have and people might be so interested in what you have. I'm interested in what you're doing as well. And you know, we all have a duty of care to be able to take this learnings and implement it in how we do things on a day-to-day basis, not only from a business perspective, how we conduct ourselves.
Absolutely.
I agree.
Well, awesome. Thanks again, Shereen.
No,
really
you're welcome. I'll see you soon.
too,
New
Vinny.
Year. See you
All
in the
right.
new
to
year.
the
right.
new year. That's right. And to
To
our
the new
audience,
year.
thanks so much. We'll see you next year. Take care.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.